I mean, that just doesn't work. And so that's some of the ways that that works. Now, physical testing, if you have to pick up a box or a piece of paper or a notebook that's 20 pounds, they usually don't test you. But if you're going to be going around sacks of feed all day long for 8 hours that are 100 pounds each, there might be a test for that. And we all know about firemen's tests and police tests and those things that are more physically oriented. Other than that, you're really not going to get into those tests. Sorry, go ahead. I'm not sure I covered this on my slideshows, so okay, psychological personality testing. Myers-Briggs, there's a lot of those, a lot of different kinds. Go ahead. Yeah, that DISC result, I'm sure everybody can read that, but it
tells you your personality.
Right, a Jungian philosophy, and it tells you how you prefer to do things. So it doesn't tell you if you're popular or not popular or whatever. It says, I prefer to process things externally or internally. Go. Drug testing. Okay, there's various ways. Now, I want just to briefly talk about what the pros and cons are of each of those. Blood test. What's the pro and con of a blood test, please?
I will get into that on my
Oh,
slides.
well, never mind then. Excellent. I should have realized that maybe this was an intro. The polygraph. Anybody going to do polygraph?
No.
Okay, except for the federal government, polygraphs are illegal. Many times the students will tell me why, because they're invalid. If they're invalid, then why does the government use them on every single important case and person that they do? They're invasive. They probably violate your constitutional rights, and nobody is willing to swear by them. And we are so unqualified in administering them that it would be a disaster. If I were to give each of you a polygraph test on if you ever cheated in college, think of the ramifications. Hair. Oh, you're going to do hair too, right? You're going to do hair. I got to say hair is because that gives you long-term cocaine use. So if you're ever going to go in and there's going to be a hair analysis, you need to go in looking like Mr. Clean.
They cut a lot of my hair off.
Yeah, because it gives you a 4, 5, 6 week or more period of time. I think they're ridiculous. But it will tell you if you're a case. Now,
Are those expensive, more expensive than regular tests?
yeah, urine tests aren't expensive, but the problem with, what's the difference between cocaine and marijuana?
Marijuana stays just
I thought that would bring up a lot of conversation. One's water soluble and the other one is oil soluble. Marijuana will stay in your system a lot longer than cocaine, which means it gets caught a lot more, but it is certainly less of a problem. Don't tell your parents I said that. Ashley, thank you very much for allowing me to do that.
Okay, I'm going to talk to you guys about the legality of pre-employment testing, and topics I'm going to touch are the common legal issues, some examples of them, and how employers like yourselves hopefully in the future can avoid these situations. A lot of times when you're dealing with the legality, it causes stress and anxiety for everybody involved. Obviously the applicants, because they're stressed, they think they might fail, they're not going to do well, and employers because there's a lot of laws saying what's legal and what's illegal, and basic rights that you can not violate, but things that you can walk the line on. So what defines a legal pre-employment test? No matter race, gender, religion, anything like that, they have to be fair, unbiased, and related to the job. I can test you guys all on a million different things, but if it doesn't help me assess your ability to do the job, it doesn't make any sense. Illegal pre-employment test, as defined by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, mostly is things medically. If you're anything that can be considered invasive or conducted by a doctor requiring medical equipment. The big statute that has to do with this is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, race, color, national origin, and religion. An example of this was, I think it was 2014. CVS was actually found to be asking questions that were designed to reveal disability and race on their application. So the Rhode Island ACLU filed a complaint, and CVS admitted fault and did away with them. Another issue that you have to deal with is right to privacy. It's a growing concern for employers because they want to find out as much as they can about you, but they can't pry and be too invasive. Some topics that covers are sexual preference, religious views, and political views. An example of this was in Washington, D.C., a hiring agency created 50 fake applicants. 25 were fictional transgender individuals, and they were better qualified than male or female applicants, and there was a high trend of discrimination because it was indicated on their application that they were transgender. Negligent hiring is another issue. It's when you have an applicant who's known for causing problems or issues in the past. They're basically a liability, and you can be in trouble for that if you end up hiring that. An example was, this is Erin Andrews, she works for ESPN. She sued Marriott Hotels for, the suit didn't go to court yet, for $75 million because a Marriott employee was spying on her and he had a past history of problems like that. So if you are ever fortunate enough to be in charge at your job, you can avoid these legal issues by, when you're giving your test, you disregard everything such as race, color, national origin, and you make it all equal across the board. Drugs, I'm going to touch on the legality of other pre-employment testings like we talked about before, drug screening, background checks, and credit checks. First, I'm going to start with the drug screen. If it switches. Okay. State laws typically allow employers to test for drugs, but you have to make sure that the applicant knows that it's part of the process. You have offered the job, and it's just pending on passing the drug test, and all applicants are tested similarly. You can't choose who to test and how. Background check is the same thing. You need consult, and it must not discriminate. You have to have the same standards for all applicants, and you have to be careful when making your decisions based on them, because your background check might be more likely to show some things that are contingent to just one group of people. The credit check is legal, but you have to have the applicant's consent. You have to give them a warning, along with a copy of the report if you plan to turn them away from the job because of something that came up on their credit report. And you have to give them an official notice of adverse action. Something that happened with me is I interned at Speedway over the summer, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but Speedway bought all of Hess's retail locations across the country, and we had to test all the new employees that were coming from the Hess stores to make sure they held up to the standards that Speedway wanted to do. You can see here, Speedway is big in the Midwest, and all of these were the previous Hess locations, so now Speedway owns them all. So as you can imagine, that took up a giant chunk of time in the conversion process, was testing and verifying employee status. One thing that I had to do in my actual internship was sit in on interviews, and I had a checklist while my boss was doing things. I was going off on the checklist and checking certain topics or answers, testing for honesty and integrity and things like that. So I covered the legality, and now Robert's going to talk about the pros and cons of testing.
Okay, just real quick, one point. Go back to your credit check. It is commonly misunderstood, and I think that in the literature, on web, and lots of places you'll find this. The credit checks that are done for employment testing do not look at credit scores. They look at other things such as credit honesty, kiting, and some things that you don't even know are on there, but they are not allowed to look at credit scores. All right, please go right ahead.
Okay, hi, I'm Rob. I'm going to talk to you today about the pros and cons of testing. I'll be touching upon psychological testing, personality testing, drug testing, integrity testing, and physical testing. I will also go over the Wonderlic test and explain the pros and cons of that pre-employment test. The pros of psychological testing. Psychological tests increase workplace safety. It also allows the company to hire the best available employees that can handle the job. It also leads to greater capability among the compatibility among the employees. With that said, more compatibility can equal more productive in the future. The cons of psychological testing. Psychological testing can get expensive if the company is doing it for multiple candidates. These tests can be seen as intrusive and by potential future employees. Lastly, these tests can take time to complete, and time is not something the company has sometimes. The pros of a personality testing. Doing these tests allow the company to hire employees that are compatible with one another. They also lead to decreased employee turnover, which is important in any business. And lastly, these tests could lead to increased team morale. The cons of personality testing, these types of tests are also expensive to conduct when they are done for multiple employees. Applicants may not answer accurately. They may choose a strategic answer in order to get hired. These tests can also carry legal risk with them. The pros of drug testing. Employees who pass drug tests tend to have better productivity and have less absences. Drug tests also reduce the risk of workplace injuries, and lastly, they help lower future health insurance costs. The cons of drug testing. There are always privacy concerns when conducting these types of invasive tests. Drug tests can get very expensive very fast, so companies opt for cheap ones. However, the cheap drug tests have a higher likelihood of producing false positives or false negatives. The pros of integrity testing. Future employees who score highly on this test are likely to involve in unethical behavior or unlikely or work. So behaviors include time stealing overall, lying, and more. Overall, these employees are more committed to being productive. The cons of integrity testing. Applicants may only tell you what you want to hear, which means there's no way of knowing if the person being interviewed is telling the truth or not. An example of this type of question: do you agree or disagree that the majority of people lie to their employees from time to time? The pros of physical testing. Doing physicals will show if an employee can complete daily tasks that come with the job. This will also increase overall safety in the workforce. Lastly, hiring employees with the necessary physical qualifications will lead to higher productivity overall. The cons of physical testing. There are also privacy concerns like some of the other tests that we talked about today. A failed physical could lead to losing a top candidate that the company wanted. If you do not hire the employee, the company must be ready to defend themselves against any legal recourse. So when I was in high school, I played football, and every year in high school, my coach would administer a test. He referred to it as the Wonderlic test. And although it wasn't a real version, it was a version that he made specific to our current level of education and our positions on the field. History of the Wonderlic test. This test was created in 1937 by E.F. Wunderlich. The Wonderlic test is a personality test, and it was the first of its kind. It was used in the NFL. It wasn't used in the NFL until 1970s, but now the test is given at the NFL Scouting Combine every year. What is the Wonderlic test? It is a standardized test administered by the NFL that consists of 50 multiple-choice questions to be answered in 12 minutes or less. It is a cognitive ability test that presents questions in an open response format. The Wonderlic questions cover multiple areas, including analogies, analysis of, more. After completing the test, my coach would separate us into two groups: players who scored highly and players who did not. We were paired together, and players who scored highly would work throughout the season to mentor the students who scored low on the test. I scored high, so I was given a mentee. My responsibility was to provide additional coaching when needed. If my mentee was doing something incorrectly, it was my responsibility to help him get better. This included problems with overall technique and mental errors. This preseason intellectual test helped our team greatly. The pros of Wonderlic test. The Wonderlic test is a way for the NFL teams to measure the intelligence of a player before drafting them. Teams do this in hope of drafting ideal players that will fit in their particular program, and the test measures the person's ability to make decisions and solve problems. Cons of Wonderlic test. Some people are not proficient test takers. This could lead to low scores, which does not necessarily indicate low intelligence. A low score will make the player drop in the draft selection order, and that means their future earnings will suffer as well. Continued, the test results received do not correlate with future NFL performance at all, which I found, meaning that the score that the player receives has no impact on the way that they will perform in the future. My research found that also people will start to stop taking these tests and will opt not to because it only hurts them, and it doesn't really show any indication of how they will be better. So thank you for listening. Now you'll hear from Rachel, who will discuss how to select the test.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'll be discussing how to select the test. So the first thing when selecting a test is you want to think, what do you want your test to measure? So we assess what it is we want to measure by using a criterion. And a criterion is any measure of work behavior that can be used as the standard for successful job performance. So some examples might be productivity, supervisory, or absenteeism. And the better that your criterion can assess what is your intended measure, the more successful you will be in the job. You also want to make sure that your test is valid and reliable. Reliability is, are the results repeatable, and validity is, does this test measure what is intended to measure? So you also want to think, is your test necessary for the job function? So if you're going to hire a history teacher, it's likely you're not going to give them a physical ability test asking them to run 7-minute